All right. Well, we'd like to welcome everyone out to the Orem Business Alliance's April webinar. So I just want to welcome everybody out and introduce a few of the people we have here. So I'm Nate Prescott. I'm the Economic Development Analyst for the City of Orem. So I help businesses. That's my whole job. We also have my boss here, Kathy Lewis, who is the Economic Development Division Manager. And together we're focused on just building up the Orem business community and helping businesses in any way that we can. So if there's ever anything that you need that you think, hey, maybe the city might be able to help us, we're the faces to the people that can help you. So please give us a call. Our email's usually included. If you're getting these emails for this webinar, you've got our information. So please just reach out in any way you can find. With that being said, I wanted to give a little heads up about a few interesting things that are happening right now. So there's 2 grants that are out for businesses that are affected by COVID-19. If you've had any issues, if you've had a decline in business, you will most likely qualify for some of these grants. So first off, we have the Small Business Catalyst Grant. And we also have the Utah County Restaurant Assistance Program. So both of those, if you're a restaurant in Utah County, you've been affected by COVID, you probably qualify for it. All that information is in the same emails that I sent out this webinar information in. So you should have access to it. If you have any questions, please reach out. We'd love to help. So with that being said, we'd like to introduce our speaker, Heff. So Matthew Heffelfinger is the Director of SIEM Operations for SecurityMetrics Incorporated, based in Orem. Nearly everyone calls him Heff, so that's much easier than Heffelfinger, right?
Perfect.
At SecurityMetrics, he leads the Security Operations Center and Threat Intelligence Center, which is composed of cyber threat hunters who stop hackers from attacking and destroying businesses of all sizes. Heff has been practicing cybersecurity for over 15 years, including leading cyber teams at General Electric, NBC Television, TJMaxx Inc., like TJMaxx, Marshalls, HomeGoods, all those types of companies. And most recently at Las Vegas Sands Corporation, which included the Venetian Casino in Las Vegas, as well as their casinos in Macau, China, and Singapore. His education includes Cornell, Villanova, Pepperdine, and DeVry University. He holds a variety of cyber certifications. Heff is very active in the cyber community. He serves on advisory boards for SUU and UNLV. He actively coaches and mentors cyber patriot clubs throughout the United States. And he most recently co-founded the International Museum of Technology in Las Vegas. Heff co-hosts a cybersecurity newscast for SecurityMetrics, which can be found on YouTube on the SecurityMetrics channel. So Heff, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. I'll turn the time over to you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the invite. And it's so awesome to speak to everyone here on the call about cybersecurity. And I thought today we'd talk about the threat landscape and what it's like specifically here in Utah, but what are all the other cybersecurity threats that are out there. So let me see if I could share my screen. And hopefully I know how to do this here. Well, I'm going to continue on, even though you may not be able to see me here. Let's go. Come on. Start the video. Excellent. All right. So here we go. Here's the quick agenda. I figured I'd really quickly share my cyber journey with you, and then we'll talk about the threat landscape. And Utah has a new data breach defense law that impacts all businesses across Utah. And I really want to spend just a little bit of time talking about that with all of you. And then some simple steps to protect your business. And if you have any questions, if I miss anything, Nate or Kathy, if anybody raises their hand, please let me know. I will do my best to answer any questions I can. But it is nuts. It's nuts out there, folks, with the threat landscape. And of course, the Microsoft Exchange breach and SolarWinds. It just keeps going on. The era of the mega hack is what we're entering right now. But that is my title. It's a really confusing title, but essentially what I do for a living is I have a team of threat hunters. And what we do is we look for events in people's networks, in companies' networks, and then we try to determine whether or not the events are bad, they're malicious or not, or is it a false positive, which means it's not bad. So my team spends a lot of time looking for hackers in networks, and it is exhausting, I have to tell you, but it's so rewarding to be able to stop the bad guys when you get it right. but I have a lot of little weird letters behind my name, but that's not important. there's with threat actors, they're always changing their tactics and their techniques, which means folks that work in cyber, we're constantly trying to stay ahead of the education game and knowing all the new tactics and techniques that the bad guys are using. So we're always in school, and my journey's been really, really cool. I started my career with NBC, and then when I got to TJMaxx, they had a huge breach. I don't know if you all remember in the news, but 2006, TJMaxx had a gigantic cybersecurity breach down in Florida. And that was really my claim to fame. That's where I really learned cyber in that environment. And then, of course, I went to Sands Corp in Las Vegas and had responsibilities for China and Macau. And now my wife wanted to move back home. So that's where we're at. But if you want to learn more about the TJX breach, I'll share the PowerPoint deck, and all of the links are in the PowerPoint in the notes section, so you can learn more about it. But you know, when you get involved in a breach for a company and you have to respond, you really go from the shallow end of the pool to like the deep end of the pool really quickly. And you learn so much on how the bad guys attack and what they do and how you have to respond to it. So it's really amazing experience to go through it, but it's also heartbreaking because, you know, people's lives are being impacted and you have to have that empathy to understand what's happening to the business. So what makes cybersecurity really interesting is it's extremely complex, and it doesn't have to be like that, but unfortunately it is. And when I try to explain cybersecurity, I try to make things as simple as possible. So think of it a lot like doctors or lawyers, where they have specialties and they all tend to specialize in a different area. Well, that's exactly what it is like for me. My specialty is security operations. So that means threat hunting. That means preventing the bad guys from getting in your network, detecting them, trying to put a story around what they're trying to do to your business, and then doing the incident response part of it too. So, but there's so many different areas of cyber, and you know, we could spend years talking about all these different modalities and the different domains of cyber, but that's not why we're here today. We're here to talk about the world of cyber and the threat landscape. And if you'd like to follow along with my adventures and learn more about cyber, I host a weekly podcast show. It's on YouTube. If you search for SecurityMetrics, you can find me. And my partner, one of my threat hunters, we try to explain cybersecurity at the most basic level. So if my mom could watch the show and kind of understand the threats that are happening in the past week and what lessons you can learn from those threats to protect your business, then we did a pretty good job. And of course, my phone number's up there. You know, if you need a friend in cyber, I want to be that guy. You're always welcome to call me up, and advice is free. So you could follow along my family and cyber stuff on Facebook and Instagram too. So a little shout out, right? So, but that's where we're at right now, the era of the mega hack. Oh, say that 10 times fast, folks. It's so exhausting. Since December, folks, it has just been nuts. And I know you're following the news, and I'm sure you heard stories about SolarWinds and what happened there. And what's crazy is the bad guys, we think we attributed it to Russian bad guys, is they basically corrupted the SolarWinds software. So when a company would try to update their network with SolarWinds, the update that got pushed out was a bad update. And then all these companies said, oh my gosh, what's going on with my network? And well, the bad guys infiltrated SolarWinds, and then they sent out this bad update. So, and then what's nuts is they had this Office 365 breach that happened a month later. And then Microsoft Exchange, oh my gosh. So that happened, which was these exploits that the bad guys took advantage of. And then, of course, another thing that happened was the Excellion breach. So all these big, huge breaches keep happening with these third-party software things. And that's really making a challenge if you're a business owner and if you use any of these products and they get corrupted or breached, and including apps too. There's a lot of apps. There's a lot of stuff that breaches we don't even have time to talk about today. But all of that makes it a challenge for folks like myself. So what I do want to talk about, though, is who are the bad guys right now and who are the threat actors that do hit Nevada, do hit Utah. And the major threat actors are these nation states. And if you can think of it like, the best way to describe it is state-sponsored threats. And a lot of these countries like Russia and China and Iran, they're very hostile to our country. And what they figured out was we don't need tanks or aircraft to attack us. We can go after our infrastructure. And a lot of the reasons, motivation of these threat actors are all over the place. We call them threat actors because sometimes we don't know their motivation. It's not always about hacking. It's not always about profit like cyber criminals would do. Cyber criminals will be your folks like, I want to exfiltrate data off your network and hold it for ransom and then ask you to pay some Bitcoin. But there's a lot of folks out there that are bad folks like the hacktivists, which are trying to, they have these political agendas. They don't like your company, for instance, or they don't like your business and they don't like what it stands for. And we're going to just for the fun of it, we're going to try to take it down. There's also your typical terrorist groups that are out there. A lot of times, though, are the thrill seekers, which is the challenge for us in cyber. And those guys are the thrill of the kill. They just simply want to have mayhem and cause destruction. And then there's this final group of insider threats. And that would be, for example, an employee in your business that's unhappy, upset, whatever reason. And they think, I'm going to steal all the sales, all your clients. I'm going to exfiltrate all your data off your network. I'm going to put it all on a thumb drive and walk out of the front door and quit. So these are the folks that I'm dealing with on a daily basis. I deal with millions and millions of events, and my team has to kind of sort through all of the events every day and try to figure out what's the bad guy doing, what's their motivation, where are they coming from, and that's what makes it a challenge. Because not only do you have to know about all these threat actors that are on the screen, but then you got to know about all these different types of threats. And here's the top 10 for 2021. Drum roll, please. The top 10 threats. And phishing and spear phishing. If you're a business owner in Utah, this is always going to be on your radar. Phishing, of course, is those emails that you may get. The big thing, though, what we're seeing in Utah here is the spear phishing. And specifically, what you're seeing is the threat actors, they're doing the reconnaissance, and they'll go on places like LinkedIn or org charts. And one example that I would share with you is recently an accounting magazine got breached. And it was a bunch of accountants all over the world. But what the threat actors do is they'll go and they'll buy the list of all the accountants' names that are subscribing to this magazine. And then what they'll do is the threat actors will try to spear phish the accounting firms. And even though you may not hire all these accounting firms, you may have one or two on the list that are related, or you're using them in your environment as a vendor. So the threat actor was able then to spear phish some Utah accountants, and then they'll try to pivot. So they'll go from the accountant that they bought the name off of the dark web, and they'll try to pivot from there into your environment. And that's a typical spear phish. So that's the big thing you need to keep on your radar. I would also encourage you to think about malware and ransomware. You're going to hear me talk a little bit about that here in just a minute, but there's about 1,000 different variants of malware that at any given time I have to know and try to understand how that malware can get into your environment and what the damage it can do. So these are your top 10. We don't really have a lot of time to go into some of these more technical type things like DNS or SQL or man in the middle, but I just want you to be aware of these top 10. And out of these top 10, there's really a total, I want to say around 260 some different types of threats at any given time that could face your business. So trying to be like a subject matter expert in all of these attacks and all these types of threats is really challenging. And, in each type of threat, there's all these subcategories. So I mentioned malware, right? Malware is a type of threat. Well, there's 1,000 different types of malware. So that means my job gets infinitely more complicated as we look at each types of these attacks that could happen to you. So I'll stop there. Is there any questions or concerns or anything? All right. So now check this out. This is pretty cool. We're gonna dive a little bit deeper into the water here as we cover the threat landscape. But for 2021, the main vectors, and we call vectors pathways. So pathways into your business here in Utah. There's really 6 that you need to keep on your radar. 6 ways that the bad guys will get into your network. And typically the number one pathway right now is these phishing emails. And we're still seeing a lot of pandemic related phishing emails. So they're playing on your fear. They're playing on your uncertainty. They're really trying to get that sense of urgency in you. Hey, the Paycheck Protection Program, or we've got these loans and you need to click on this phishing email. And that's what they're doing. The second pathway or vector is if you have an environment where you're not able to patch your firewalls or your routers, or patch or update any of that software you have, well, the bad guys know that. And just because you're a small or medium-sized business, it doesn't matter to these bad guys. They want to get into your environment, and they don't care the size, whether you're Fortune 500 or different. So we saw this with the patching and the updating and unsupported software. If you think about Accellion, that breach, if you're using like old versions of Windows, for example, and it can be challenging trying to upgrade from a Windows 7, which is no longer supported by Microsoft. So that's a huge deal, and you need to keep that on your radar. The third vector is misconfigurations, unsecure setups. And you know what this comes down to is you might hire that IT person to set up your gear, but they may not have the special knowledge that it takes to get that router or firewall set up in your environment and make it configured properly. So we deal a lot with this. And the thing about it now is everybody wants to go into the cloud, and everybody's, oh, the cloud, get in the cloud. It's safer. It's more secure. But the reality is what it does is it takes your threat surface for your business and it makes it bigger and more expanded. So now you have not just the potential threats at your office or your business, but then you have anything in the cloud has to be secure too. So it makes the attack surface really a lot larger, and it creates more opportunities for the bad guys. So we're dealing with that. I know a lot of companies are trying, a lot of businesses are trying to get IoT devices. So Amazon, Alexa, and Siri, and, get those camera systems. And we see so many folks that buy cameras off Amazon and they leave the default password in the camera system, or they'll buy a camera system off Amazon and it's a Chinese brand, and the Chinese have back doors, or they have exploits that they never lock down in those camera systems. So you have to keep that on your radar as well if you have those IoTs. And then the final two is, of course, remote workers. Everybody's, a lot of people are now coming back to work. Today's my first day back in the office on campus. I'm so excited. I got to hang out with my team. But if you're using VPNs, and if you ever used a free VPN, it's free. It's got to be great. But those free VPNs, they have so many breaches and unsecure stuff. So we're dealing a lot with those issues. And then, of course, business processes. And that's talking about the bad guys finding weakness in your apps or your software. Maybe you have hardware that you've never looked at or updated. And those automated invoicing tools, if you have any of those in your environment, that's a pathway for the bad guy. So I'll stop there for just a second. I know we cover a lot. I'm a fast talker. I'm from Philly originally, so bear with my accent. I also do a really great Chris Farley impersonation. So if you guys laugh at all my jokes, I'll whip out the Farley impersonation. But that's what's happening right now. If you're here in Utah, you need to keep these 6 things. So, all right, we got a little bit of time left here, and I want to make sure that we cover the evolving landscape. And the big change that we're seeing is ransomware 2.0. You might hear this buzzword in the news. It's going to get a lot bigger. But the bad guys used to just exfiltrate data and take your crown jewels. So whatever your most important data is in your business, they used to just exfiltrate it and sell it in the dark web. And in the last year, the big change now, we're seeing them exfiltrate the data, your data, and then hold it for ransom, and they encrypt it, which is really crazy. It's like kicking you when you're already down. Your business has already been breached, and now your data's gone. It's out there on the dark web. Who knows who has it? And now they're saying, if you want to buy it back, there'll be, 5 Bitcoin or 10 Bitcoin. So if you want an analogy of what it's like every day in my office, it's like being a goalie in a hockey game, and you're just getting slap shots all the time, and it's just nonstop slap shots. So this ransomware stuff is just going to it's evolving so fast, and to try to stay ahead of it, it's just really difficult. It's getting faster, it's getting stealthier, it's striking harder and harder. So I included some links to explain a little bit more about ransomware 2.0 and the evolution of that if you want to learn more. So I hope you do, because it's fascinating stuff. So yes.
Just to jump in. So I just want to reiterate to anybody, if you have any questions, you're welcome to just jump in and ask them, or you can put them in the chat and I'll ask them. So whatever you feel comfortable doing, but we'd love to have a conversation too as we go throughout. So
Yeah, please. I love questions, guys. It's this is so interesting stuff. And for me to try to explain it at a level that makes sense to you all, I hope you can appreciate it because it can get really complicated. We can get in the deep end here of the ocean pretty quick. So this, Nate, this is probably the most complicated slide I'm going to show all of you. And I just want to take a quick moment to understand, if you've never understood cybersecurity before, this explains how an attack happens. There's 3 phases. This is called the cyber kill chain. It was made by Lockheed Martin. And what it does is explains how the bad guys get in your network, what they do when they get there, and then how they get the data off your network. So what we see, and I know you guys love horror stories, you love war stories. So I'm a cyber war veteran here, but what happens on a lot of these attacks is the bad guys do reconnaissance. And what that means is they scan your network. They're always scanning, whether you're a big business, small business, or enterprise, Fortune 500, they're looking for vulnerabilities or exploits. When they find them, then they typically go after it. And they may not always know the motivation behind why they're coming after you, but realize that the reconnaissance stuff is much bigger than you realize. And my goal is always to stop the bad guys before they get in your network, because once they get in, they're going to do a lot of damage. So the reconnaissance, here's a story for you. I've seen situations where the bad guys they'll go on LinkedIn and they'll find an employee and they'll create a fake profile for themselves. The bad guys do this, and they'll pretend like, oh, I'm a recruiter. I'm from Hershey, and I love your resume. I would love to hire you away from that company you're working for in Utah, and I want you to fill out this document. And what they do is they weaponize a PDF document or an Excel spreadsheet with some malware in it. They deliver that to your inbox or to your employee's inbox, and they click on it. And now what the bad guys have done is they have going to try to pivot from the employee's personal life into their work life. And once they get in your network, then during the attack, they try to move laterally. So they'll try to jump from your web server, your email server, maybe into your accounting server, maybe into your HR stuff. And then from there, they'll find something of value. And what that means is your crown jewels. It might be sales information. It may be client lists and so on. They'll try to then take control of that information and then exfiltrate it out. And that's where the damage, that ransomware stuff we talked about, they'll either exfiltrate it or they'll take your data and hold it for ransom. So that is the essential 3 parts here of how a bad guy gets in and what they do. And my goal is always to stop the bad guys from getting in the network. My goal is to make it really hard for them to move laterally, and really make it hard that they can't get information off your network. So as you move through the colors, you notice that the risks get higher and the cost to contain the breach gets even more difficult. And that is the challenge. Since once they've exfiltrated the data, it's out there. You can never get it back. So I'll stop here. Any concerns, questions? Yeah.
I wanted to ask about that because this sounds like very realistic that it could happen to anybody on this call, so like one, I guess, how could you train employees to because I don't know if it's realistic to ask them like never engage with anybody that emails you, or sends you a link or a document, so what's like some easy ways that we could either filter out as much of the bad ones as possible or just protect against it?
Yeah. And that is the best part. I thought what I would do is towards the end of the deck, I know budgets are tight for a lot of businesses, and I wanted to give you guys a list, an actionable list that's low cost, inexpensive, doesn't cost you a dime. And that's the number one thing is security awareness. And that's because your humans, your employees are your number one. They're your firewall. They're your human firewall. And by making them more aware of what a malicious email would look like, that's like half the battle. And it doesn't cost you a dime. I mean, obviously the labor hours involved to teach them and so on, but that is probably the number one thing I'm going to share with you guys as we get towards the last couple slides here. But yeah, excellent point. All right, so check this out. We're gonna come out of the deep end of the water now, and I just want you guys to be aware of some stats. And these stats always kind of blow my mind. I mentioned ransomware 2.0, but IBM and Pwned report, they put out some stats, and they said that 60% of small businesses that suffer a cyber attack are out of business in 6 months. And that just breaks my heart because my family shops here. My friends shop here, I shop here, and I don't want to ever see that. And I know how valuable that businesses are for a small business can range in from 36 to 50,000. And you can mitigate that, obviously, buying cybersecurity stuff and cyber insurance. But that's amazing. That's a huge amount of dollars. And you think about how much it costs for a Fortune 500 company, which is in the millions, and they can offset a lot of that risk with insurance. But you don't want to have that extra expense if you don't have to. So I mentioned all the different malware variants out there, but I do want to focus on one number, 61%. And I'm going to read it twice because it's so important. 61% of vulnerabilities found in businesses are older than 5 years. Again, 61% vulnerabilities, businesses 5 years. What that means is, what the hackers do is they know that you may have older software in your business. You may be running Windows 7, which is not supported by Microsoft. So they take advantage of that. And they know that you may not have the time to update or patch. So they take advantage of that. And it's really disheartening to know that, but that's good for you, because now you know that if I need to patch and I need to get things, the vulnerabilities fixed, I can set forth a little bit of a plan to try to mitigate some of that risk. So, but making the challenge even harder is everybody wants to go to the cloud. So by going to the cloud, now you've made your attack surface so much bigger, and you made all these doorways for the bad guys to come in. So that creates another area of opportunity that we need to look at and try to protect. So a lot of the vulnerabilities that are in the news are all these third parties. So, how do you stop a SolarWinds breach? If you bought the software or you licensed it, or you licensed Microsoft Exchange, and you thought they were secure and they weren't. So that's a very big challenge. I will share that, from a phishing perspective, Outlook is the most spoofed brand. So if you use Outlook in your business, just be aware that hackers are very skilled with Microsoft products. They're not so skilled with Apple products or Linux. So, and then they're using email more than ever to send malware. And the trend that we see here in Utah is, taking Excel documents, and they're going to put malicious code into the Excel documents, like malware into the Excel docs. And what they do is they attach that to an email, and they say, "Hey, I got that receipt, or I've got that bill that you need to look at, and it's an Excel." And you didn't, what is this email with the Excel? I don't know. I'm going to click on it. And that is how the bad guys are coming in. So I hope that it kind of jars your mind a little bit to go, wow, I didn't know all these facts. And it's really hard to sometimes hear some of this data, but it's important that we get it out there and have the conversation. So
Heff, can I ask a question?
Yes, please.
Yeah, as we look at this, it's easy to get kind of overwhelmed by this threat landscape and what's happening. And you talk about vulnerabilities. There's a constant vigilance with keeping employees and having a cybersecurity training. We do it annually in our organization, but how often do you really need to? This constant vigilance is hard for a business. Is there a cycle on which you need to strengthen or revisit your, software licenses or other things to make sure that, you're cycling with as much security as possible? And then also, breaches happen, like you said, regardless. So are there ways to better prepare?
Oh,
because it's not if, it's when, right? How do you better prepare, and how often do you cycle through like an audit?
So I'll try to do my best to answer everything here. So there's a lot of really good, helpful frameworks that are out there. And when I say frameworks, I mean based on your industry and the business that you're in and the sector that you're in. If you're in the retail sector, your banking sector, e-commerce, there's a lot of really good frameworks that can make recommendations. What I always say is you do what's best for the needs of the business. The needs of the business always come first. It's not about what Heff says. Just because I'm in cybersecurity, I don't want to be the police department and say, no, we got to lock it down. Oh, we got to do security awareness training every day. That's not the right pathway. It's always about what do we need to do to make the business be successful. And when you find a cyber professional that thinks like that, you're on the right track. The second part of your question then is how often, and you talk about audits and all that stuff. What I always say is, you're going to have to, you have that regulatory compliance piece. So if it's PCI, you've got to meet those requirements. If it's HIPAA, you've got to meet those requirements. And they're not meant to hinder you. They're meant obviously to make the business stronger and safer and protect your customers too. So always doing what the frameworks recommend is a good starting path. But for me to sit here and tell you like, oh, just this business has to do it this one way is, I never would want to hurt you guys or hinder your guys at all like that. So I hope I got some of your points. I know it's a lot of questions. So.
Thanks.
All right. You bet. Yes. And this is the thing. I don't know if you're aware of this. I don't even, Nate or Kathy, did you guys know about this new data breach defense law? No. More laws, right? We got to have more regulatory laws to make our lives more difficult. It's already hard enough, right? But no, I think when you look at this, you realize that it's not meant to hinder you. It's actually meant to protect you. And I hate to use that spin word, but the Cybersecurity Affirmative Defense Act, it came into law. The governor signed it March 11th. What it does is it tries to give you a defense for your business against any sort of data breach. And there's 3 affirmative defenses that the law provides. So what it's in a nutshell, and trying to summarize a law in like one slide is really difficult. But if you're a business and you have some sort of written protection to protect your data, then you could potentially have a defense if you ever get breached or hacked. So the law is built around 3, it's called the CIA triad, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. But the law focuses on if you have administrative controls in your business, if you have technical controls and physical safeguards to protect your data. And the administrative controls, an example would be if you have a written policy for acceptable use of the internet, or if you have a password policy, that would be part of the written program. The technical control would be maybe you have a thing called endpoints, which are like little pieces of software installed on every device in your business. And that could alert you if a bad guy is doing something in your network. And then physical safeguards would be like you have badges and maybe you have controls on the doors so people just can't walk in and out without permission. So this is part of it. There's a lot more going on in this Defense Act, but I've included the link to an article that explains as best as I can. I'm surprised the local news media hasn't picked up on this to try to explain it better. I have my phone number on the thing. If you want to call me or talk about it, advice is free. I'll do my best to give you a template on how to comply with it, but always consult your lawyer, your legal counsel on how to respond to this. They may not even be aware of it either, but it's fascinating stuff. Concerns, questions? I'll try to explain anything else I missed.
So really the purpose of this law is if my business complies with these 3 factors, I have a stronger defense if one of my third parties gets a breach or somebody else, so that hopefully my business doesn't go out and I don't have to have a major fine.
I love it. That's a great way of explaining it. You did a lot better explaining it than what I could. And I will share that there is some dialogue in this law that says, hey, let's say you have hired a service provider, an IT person to help you out, and they notified you, and then you chose to not do anything about it or respond to what the third party provider told you, then that's a different case. And that's outlined in the law as well. So.
Thank you.
Good. I think we need a breather moment here. Oh, okay, we're almost there, folks. I'm gonna take you out of the water here and let's get on the shoreline and get dried off. It's so challenging out there to try to come up with. Everybody says, "Oh, cyber's expensive," and it can be, but I always like to say, what are the low-hanging fruits? The things that you can do right now that don't cost a lot of money, that you can pretty much do for free, other than the time commitment that you may have to invest. So here are some samples. This is the first thing you need to be aware of. HaveIBeenPwned.com. It's a site that we use here at my office. You can put in your email ID or you put in your phone number and you can do a search, and it'll tell you if your email or phone number is part of a cybersecurity breach. So this is not a malicious website. I'm not giving you a bad website to go to. This is a legit website. And if you remember last week, Facebook A 500 million IDs were scraped from the Facebook website. And this is going back a while. This actually happened back in 2019, but it's just now really making the news. So you can actually go in, if you have a Facebook email or any kind of email, you can go in there and look, and it'll tell you if you're part of the Facebook breach. So this is a good website to use. I've included the link in the notes. The second thing you need to be aware of is MFA. Yes, I've heard of MFA. I'm good. I'm glad some of you have heard of it. And MFA, multi-factor authentication. So if you've ever, when you use your phone, and some banking apps have it now, where it says, hey, you want to turn on MFA, you put in your thing and it sends you a little code. Hey, please input this code on the app or in the website. Well, that's MFA. Some MFA apps actually use the thumbprint on the back of your phone if you have a thumbprint scanner on your phone. But what I recommend more than anything, take an hour of your life and turn on MFA for all your banking apps, no matter what you do, your finance apps, your accounting apps, any of those banking apps, especially Venmo or PayPal. Please turn on MFA. It's a wise investment of your time to get MFA turned on as many apps as you can. So, and if you struggle with it, give me a call and I'll do my best to try to explain it over the phone, how to turn on MFA for some of these apps. Some of them are really challenging, believe it or not. They don't make it easy. They never make cybersecurity easy. All right. Now, you mentioned, what can I do about it? We talked about security awareness, and these are the 9 things that don't cost a lot of money that you can do right now to protect your business. And the number one is security awareness. All new employees, all current employees, there's a lot of free security awareness stuff out there. You can Google it, security awareness training, PowerPoint, and you'll get tons of stuff. But if you realize that the threat actors are targeting employees' personal life, and then they're accessing the work life, they're pivoting from the personal life into work life, that changes the game. And there's no way that you can say to employees, hey, don't go to this website or don't do this. But in your environment, just training them to recognize, here's an example of a phishing email where they have the Bank of America logo and it's just modified slightly. And that's the kind of trigger that they need to be a little bit more vigilant, a little bit more resilient, a little bit more cognizant of. That goes a long way. So not clicking on the suspicious links or attachments is critical. I recommend, if you don't have an acceptable use policy, you should create one. I have a free template. I'll send you if you want it. But never using the same password at work or home. That is critical, guys. That personal life and work life mix, where the person has the same password for Disney Plus, Amazon, Gmail, Yahoo, the work accounts all have the same login or password. I hope that's not any of you guys, but my wife was like that. I said, honey, we got to change this. We can't have the same password for everything. So it took a good solid day to go through all of our apps and change all those passwords. But a password manager is available out there. There's a lot of free ones. Be careful. I included a link to explaining what the status of the current world of password managers. Some of them are now trying to charge. All these free ones, they're saying, oh, we got to make money. So I don't have a recommended one, believe it or not, because I hate to recommend certain vendors over others. But if you're using a password manager, that's a good sign. And regular password changes is important. How often you should change your password, that's up for debate. But typically most organizations do 60 to 90 days. And if you have other old passwords, unused passwords, former employees no longer with the company. In Utah, we're seeing a lot of trends of ghost hacking, which means hackers know, or they find out that the employee is no longer with a company, and they use that login and password, which is never deactivated. So the last 3 things on here is backing up your data, a log collection. That's the first thing I ask when a hack happens. Like, hey, can I see your logs? And if you don't have remote access or firewall logs, it makes it really challenging. And if you can get an inventory of everything in your environment, that makes it so much easier for folks like myself when we do incident response. If you have a breach and I know all your hardware, all your software, your IP addresses, that makes it a lot easier. So I hope you had fun. I know I talk fast and we got a lot to cover, but it's so much fun doing this stuff, folks. And it's just so enjoyable to protect companies. And I hope you feel that in the conversation that I had with you today. And of course, I do have a podcast. I'd love you to hang out with me if you want to learn more on YouTube. We talk a lot about some really cool things. So Any questions I can maybe ask or answer?
So let's say we suspect that we've, clicked on something we shouldn't have. What's the first thing we should do?
Don't panic. That's, oh my gosh, what did I just do? Oh no. What I always say is never panic. Take a moment and don't close down your computer. And if you have a coworker that's available, that's next to you, get a second opinion. The next thing you probably want to do is you probably want to take that website or that link you clicked on, and you can actually do your own cybersecurity. You don't really need me to tell you, but if you take that link and you copy and paste it into a website called VirusTotal, it will actually tell you if the website is malicious or not. So VirusTotal, Google actually owns the website, believe it or not. And they have a bunch of links out there, and they will tell you whether or not the link is bad. And then the third thing is, depending on your level of comfort and your level of technical skill, if you think you activated malware in your environment or ransomware, then you need to call in somebody on your team that is your IT person, and let them give you better guidance. Because they may say, hey, this is really nasty malware, or maybe they will say, you know what, you didn't activate it, or maybe you got lucky and your company has like endpoints where they can sandbox it, or virus scanning software where it can sandbox it. So your situation is going to be so different, but yeah, that's the best steps in my opinion.
Something that interested me, you talked about like an Excel sheet that has malware encoded in it. Like that sounds crazy to me, but so will like virus scanning, software pick that up? Will I get a notification like, hey, you probably shouldn't click this link? Like I've seen it on similar things, but that sounds really sophisticated.
It is. And it's all really dependent on the type of software that you have in your environment, the type of scanning software. Some people, I've seen a lot of businesses where they just don't use anything whatsoever because they just don't see it as a threat. And if that's your risk appetite, then that's understandable. But depending on the software that you have, and if you're lucky enough to have some sort of protection, and there's a lot of free, like I know a lot of people use Malwarebytes. I know a lot of people use Windows Defender. They're two really good programs that can help you out if you're looking for a cost-effective solution. But yeah, that's kind of your first line of defense there before calling in any of the big guns out there, your IT staff.
So we got someone in the chat. Amber said, what should we do if we ran our email on Have I Been Pwned and it came back as breached?
Yeah, I would change your email or your password. And the exciting thing is, and I say this weirdly, exciting thing is because the Facebook stuff goes all the way back to 2019, there's a good chance that you may have already changed your password in the last year or so. But if it's not a Facebook related breach and maybe it's saying something else like another app or something, number one, I would obviously change your password, your stuff. I would also look at if you use the same password on any of the other apps or programs out there, I would definitely spend a little bit of time just trying to change those passwords. And that's probably your best 2 steps to take. If you come up in that website, Have I Been Pwned? I know that I am like super vigilant on stuff like this now. And I it's like cat ears, right? My cat ears go up and go, oh my gosh, our information came up in this website. What are we going to do, honey? And we try not to overreact. It's a calm, cool collective, but strategically, what do we need to do? We need to change this email is shared by this app and this app. Let's just go in and just change those for right now. And, I'm one of those guys, folks, that I don't even use my debit card at the gas station because there's so many of those gas pump skimmers out there. I only use my credit card. On my debit card, I barely keep more than $100 in there at any time. That's another good trick. So, I mean, there's little things you can do, and that's another conversation for another day. But there's so many little things you can do to protect yourself and stay vigilant on so many different levels.
Okay, when you talk about changing passwords often, that brings up an issue. How do you track all those passwords? Do you have, because you don't want to do a password system that someone can breach your password system, your password saver or your password, keeper. So what do you recommend to keep all your passwords straight?
So the lucky thing about password managers is they can do a lot of storage of passwords that are encrypted. They can encrypt your passwords. But the problem you have is if you follow the news right now, a lot of these password managers are trying to migrate away from being free, and they're trying to charge a fee. And then on top of all that, in my mind, I'm always wondering, well, what if I get breached in my home life and my password manager login gets breached? I'm really like a little bit concerned about that, right? I would be too. Yeah. So you have a couple options there, and probably your best option is to choose a password manager that has good reviews. I think I've included a link from the New York Times that they review password managers every year, and they kind of scored them on what they think. It's a pretty objective. It doesn't have a lot of bias into it, and that's the thing too. You got to read through the bias. A lot of these password manager apps, they're out to sell your data, right? Hopefully they're not, but a lot of them are. So check out that New York Times article, which tries to explain what's the best password manager to choose. So
thank you.
Yeah, no problem. It's amazing, folks. You want a cyber horror story, a war story. It's amazing how the threat actors would try to get in your environment. And I'll give you a perfect example. You have a soda machine in your break room. And, we're seeing these soda machines have Wi-Fi, and then they're connected to your network. So that's to do the transactions, right? The credit card transactions when you buy a soda. Well, the threat actors know that your soda machine probably isn't being updated. It's probably not being looked at. So the threat actors will try to get into your environment, and they will pivot from that soda machine, then looking for vulnerabilities and exploits that they can take advantage of. And then they will try to pivot from the soda machine into your world. So again, that's where you see that kill chain I talked about, where they try to move laterally. Here it is, a soda machine. Who would have ever thought the bad guys would use a soda machine to get into your network? But that's a perfect example of you're doing an inventory, right? You're listing out all the hardware and software in your environment and all the IP addresses, and you forgot about the soda machine, and that's what the bad guys used to get in. So you never even think about that.
So how do you protect against that?
Yeah, what I put together, there's this thing called the critical security controls. And if you guys want to email me, I will send you a list of steps to take. The critical security controls, they try to outline what should you do step by step by step. And the first thing they recommend is always getting an inventory of everything in your environment. Once you have that inventory, then you can then start on the next couple steps, which might be things like looking at configurations of your network devices. And again, I don't want to get all technical here, but you got to look at your admin and user privileges and look at your logs. And it just starts this snowball effect of all these little steps and behaviors and actions that you can take. Again, a lot of them don't cost any money, but you start doing these little steps. And at some point you realize, hey, we're getting more and more hardened and secure every month. We're building up our risk, lowering our risk, excuse me. So, but yeah, it's called critical security controls. I'll include that link in the presentation as well.
Oh, thank you. That's interesting.
It's a real easy read. They made it like a chart, a colorful chart.
Oh, that's great.
We also had a question from Brittany. She says, are there reputable companies around here that can evaluate our office and setups?
Yes. And there's actually, I never want to recommend one vendor. I obviously work for SecurityMetrics. I know you guys, there's the shameless plug, but that's what we do. We're a local company, but there are, I know, I always see commercials on television here in Utah for, what is that? Les Olson. I know they do cybersecurity. I know Cox does. The problem is figuring out your budget. And I know we do it really expensive. And it's kind of cool to be able to do it. Yeah, for years I've always worked for these big corporations where we've had huge cyber budgets and we just throw money at problems. And you can't do that when it comes to the small to medium business size world. You can't throw money at this problem. You have to start with security awareness and those fundamentals of teaching and coaching. So there's a bunch of companies. There's 3 that I just mentioned for you.
Great. Are there any other questions? We'll give it another minute to see if any more come in. This has been very interesting though, Heff. We appreciate you answering our questions.
No, and I hope you invite me back. I love talking about the threat landscape. Maybe we can do an annual thing
that'd
talking
be
about
great.
what it's like here in Utah. It is nuts, folks. I spend a lot of my partnerships with the FBI here in town and the SIAC, which is the fusion center. It's up by the airport there. And we share a lot of intelligence about what the bad guys are doing specifically here in town. And the threats are different here in Utah than what they would be in bigger cities. And it's just interesting, what they find value from these threat actors.
That's true. I think that's the one thing that I learned the most, because to me, cybersecurity was targeting cyber crime, but there are other reasons why they're breaching security. And that opened my mind, that it's not always just criminal monetary reasons that they're breaching.
Yeah, I know a perfect example that I had is just recently we had we're looking at sensors on a network, and the traffic at 4:00 in the morning when the business was closed is escalating. We're talking like terabytes and terabytes of data being exfiltrated, and that's not normal, So we're looking at this traffic at 4:00 in the morning, and we contact the client. We say, hey, what do you think about this? We're seeing the traffic going from your business to an IP address in Russia, allegedly an IP address in Russia. And of course, the business owner said, there's no way. My offices are closed. There should be no one on my network. And that's the kind of value add that when you can find that and do it cost effectively, because it's easy to get alerts and you might be overwhelmed by what is all this traffic and all this bad stuff. But then having someone that can kind of like analyze it and go, I can attribute this to China, or I can attribute this to Russia. And I know that this is the packets of data that they took off your network. Now let's come up with a plan to try to prevent this from happening again, and also get your systems back up online, get the lights back on.
You're going to leave us on the hook, or do we get to know what happened, with the data going out to Russia? Did you find anything?
We did. Yes, we did. And you know what it was? It was the camera systems. It was, they had so much traffic. The bad guys, well, first of all, the business owner bought this camera system. I mentioned buying camera systems from Amazon, and you're not doing your homework, not doing your due diligence. You buy this cheap, trying to save money, maybe buying this inexpensive Chinese knockoff camera system. And the next thing you know is that had some malware in it, and it was actually came from the manufacturer, and the business owner put that in their environment, did not know. And that's what our alerts triggered on, finding that traffic. And then once they got in the network, it was, okay, now we can see what the cameras, the bad guys can see what you're doing, but what can we take from the business owner? What data, what crown jewels can we take and then possibly sell it on the dark web? And we think that was the motivation behind what was happening.
That's crazy. Well, thank you.
So what did you do? Do they have to replace their security cameras?
Well, that's the recommendation, but that's not always necessarily the case. Again, I mentioned you can't just throw money at it. Maybe you spend a significant amount of money buying this camera system, and to just throw it away, that might not be the right path. So normally that conversation is, here's some recommendations, and you may want to think about reformatting, completely getting a fresh install on this camera system. That would be like step one, for example. Mm-hmm. And it's never an easy discussion either, because I honestly feel like a doctor at times. I feel like, hey, we found this cancer in your environment. It's stage 4. Here's the bad news, but there's good news. We're going to try to fix it. So.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Heff. This has been super interesting and very valuable and relevant, I think, to a lot of us. And we'd definitely love to have you back sometime. This cybersecurity is only going to be more and more relevant and more of an issue. So thank you so much for your time. And we will send out a copy of the presentation to everyone who attended today. So thank you, Heff, and thanks to everyone for coming.